next up is Tom Clark from Denver.
I always come to Vegas for the buffets, and I realize I'm the last thing between you and the buffet. When I first met the guys from Brookings, Rob asked me, he says, so what's your relationship with Washington? And I said, well, I spent most of my career trying to ignore it. And then along came a lady by the name of Lindy Schumacher who did something a lot smarter. She decided to bring Brookings here. And I want you to know on behalf of all of us in the Intermountain West, Lindy, that was a great gift to all of us. Brookings has opened doors for us. They've created a market position for us in Washington, if you will, amongst the politically elite, and given us a voice and access that we've never had before, and we owe a great deal of that to you, so thanks. I was listening to my two counterparts, and before I begin, what do I have to do to get to my presentation here, by the way? There we go. I was thinking about, at one time our leadership group was almost all white guys, all above the age of 50, all of them Republicans, and very much inwardly looking. We thought Denver had pretty much everything the world needed, including unbreathable air. And so we started pushing our leadership out, and we ended up in Phoenix seeing a thing called the Decision Theater, which Todd was kind enough to show us again this morning. We've just replicated that in Denver. It was such a great idea. I want you to know, though, Todd, the software for your program was actually, it was made in Denver, so it's okay. And when we came time to build our transit system, we went to Salt Lake, and we said to Salt Lake, tell us if there was one thing you could do differently, what would that be? And they said, we didn't have a central interchange of all forms of transit at Salt Lake. If we had it to do over again, that's the way we would have done it. So we took our old Union Station and turned it into this multimodal transportation system. It almost doubled the price to $500 million, but now we will have a central interchange. So I think all of us in the Mountain West are getting a little bit better at talking to one another. This was the greatest joke in 1986 in metropolitan Denver. First minority mayor elected to Denver ran on a slogan called Imagine a Great City, and everybody just laughed. It was almost like a contradiction in terms. We sucked, and we knew it, okay? And this was like a phrase you'd hear from the most enthusiastic member of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, okay? And here's what the situation in 1985 was all about. Well, we were in the worst recession since the Great Depression, and Mike talked a little bit about what they had to go through in Dallas. It was the same thing. We were the 37th least diversified economy. We were oil, gas, defense, beer, and ag. That was it, okay? We were the largest producer per capita of beer in the United States. We were not, unfortunately, the largest consumer per capita. That was written into the Wisconsin State Constitution. We had a downtown vacancy rate of 31%. Can you imagine? 31% vacancy rate. We were auctioning off Class A office space at 14 cents a foot. We had a net out migration of 43,000 people. That's where we began to look like Mississippi. And our airport was the biggest choke point in the United States. Utah, shame on you guys in Salt Lake, ran an ad against us of this guy running into a business meeting. He said, I'm sorry, I tried to get here in the worst way. I flew through Stapleton and Denver. And we were losing market share in conventions. Okay, that was our life. And as I said, we were all white. And then, of course, we topped that off with having the second worst air pollution in the United States, second only to Los Angeles. So you can imagine that my bandwidth of potential customers was pretty narrow, okay? And I went to Los Angeles, of course, and I went to the head of Northrop Asset Management. I said, I want you to move your jet manufacturing to Denver. And he said, well, tell me how this works. I go to my board and say, let's move from the first most polluted city in the country to the second most polluted city in the country. He said, what's the value proposition here? And this was the crowning theme. Forbes magazine in 1986, Denver economy, you can't fall off the floor. You guys got nothing on us, okay? So we started a little different direction. We decided we would create an organization called the Greater Denver Corporation. And in 1989, we funded the Metro Denver Network won the nation's highest award in economic development, and because it was the first truly collaborative regional economic development program in the country. And then in 1996, it folded its doors after a 9-year run of creating 400,000 jobs and went back into the chamber and is now the organization that I run. But how do we get there? Well, first of all, vision counts. You know, Proverbs had it right back in biblical days. Without vision, people perish. Without vision, accidents happens. LensCrafters got that one down. And I never really got that vision thing, which is a direct quote from George Bush Sr., okay? So that tells you a little bit about vision, okay? We were chasing prospects back in the 1980s during this huge downturn so badly that we literally chased them to Scottsdale and Dallas. And we entered into a place where I think you may have some experience with. It was what I referred to as the finger-pointing season. This was a whole bunch of small groups of people meeting separately to decide who was going to take the blame, okay? And there was a lot of that. It was their fault. It was the governor's fault. It was the legislature's fault. It was the private sector's fault. It was the charitable people's fault. It was everybody's job. But you had to go through that process as a community, which we did, to finally get to that point that people got tired of blaming each other and says, what the hell can we do? And we had this other thing happen. We had more economic development organizations created during this period because individuals, mayors would say, we're not working hard enough. And of course, we knew if we kept doing what we were doing, we were going to get what we get. And that was fewer and fewer jobs coming to Colorado. So everybody wanted a new vision, and I will tell you from our experience there, this is the first rule, and it's the 100th rule, and all 98 in between are the same. You have to dream big. This is the great quote from the president of the Denver Post. He said, they say you can't raise money in paradise. If that's the case, we ought to be able to raise a lot. And we did, okay? A lot of private sector money came in because we promised to do a collaborative economic development program, much like Mike's talking about, in which everybody got their shot, and it was called the Metro Denver Network. Now, the basic formula of economic development follows this little mnemonic device. I follow, IFR. I follow rivers, railroads, roads, resources, instrument flight rules, information fiber routes, read and write and arithmetic rooftops, but most of all, I follow rich people, okay? People with money, okay? And I'd like to create them, but if I don't, I'll chase them. This is a way in which we kind of looked in very much a shorthand of getting the public to think about economic development and the things that needed to be done to build it. And we all know the key location factors, you know, labor availability, quality of labor, 60 minutes from international transportation, airport, da-da-da-da-da. I won't go into all this, but it's important to know that these are the locational factors that drive corporate folks to move to you, not necessarily where you're created. We also at that time, much like Las Vegas does, knew, and much like Nevada does, we knew we had unique opportunities. We were thinking about building a new convention center. We had some money for roads back in those days. We thought maybe we could get rid of that choke point of an airport that we had. And our cultural facilities were going bankrupt. They'd been funded by the real estate and development community, and the developers walked in one day to our offices, to our board, and said, you know, we're broke. You guys want to fund the symphony and the theaters and those things, you got to figure out a way how to do it. And we did. We levied a region-wide sales tax of 0.1% to undergird the entire cultural infrastructure of the region. So the big plan was create a collaborative regional economic development, build the new convention center, build an airport, support improvements in transit, save our cultural venues, most of which were in downtown. And one thing that we knew about downtown is that most people, the only picture of downtown Denver they'd ever seen in their life was the ones in the New York Times with the brown cloud hanging over the middle of it. Everybody saw that as the retail window of our community, and the retail window of our downtown was awful. People thought oil derricks were in the 16th Street Mall, and there was nothing but tumbleweeds blowing past them. And we had to clear the air. And then go like hell, as we said. And our strategy is very simple, and watch it come around again this fall, folks. Use public work projects to build our way out of the recession. Build convention centers, build airports, build transit, build public facilities. Why? Number one, you never can get out of a recession by doing anything. What you do in a recession is to prepare your community for the recovery. And that's what public works are about. The second thing is that they can deliver a boatload of jobs really fast. And before there was such a thing as the green movement, there was recycling. It was started by heavy construction workers. They get a paycheck on Friday and they've recycled the entire check by Monday, okay? They turn around money faster than you can believe in an economy, and they're a huge jolt to your success. And then you've got to do near-term goal. You've got to near-term goals, because where you are today is not where you ultimately want to be, and this is not a jump over the start here and end here. You have to choose things in between. And most of all, our goal was never, ever, ever go through this type of downturn again if we're diverse enough. So remember this, if you remember one thing: a recession is a terrible thing to waste, okay? We were suffering also with a major inferiority complex. We'd never really built anything. And then it was really helped by this famous executive from Hughes Aircraft who said, you know, you guys, you get right to the top to be great, and then you fall back. If you could ever push over, it would be really helpful. So we got the convention center first. We built it on budget and 18 months ahead of schedule, and suddenly everybody felt they were doing a great thing and said, hey, let's go build an airport. And we made one big mistake. We let the engineers on the baggage system get out of their cubicles, okay? A $287 million baggage system ended up being sold for scrap metal. But I want you to know it does run perfectly today in Munich, okay? The company who used us as a beta test site now has that running like a banshee in Munich. Oops. And this was what I was talking, the cultural and scientific facilities. 0.1%, it underpins our entire cultural facilities. That allows us to actually build an industry of the creative culture. It wasn't just that we were going to have these things here and always try to keep them on life support. We were actually able to build an industry, and this went from an industry that just served the local marketplace to now a regional intermountain cultural and entertainment industry. We started our first cluster work in 1987. It was two-tiered. First one was we had find lower paying jobs to get the underemployed workers working and absorb this 31% vacancy rate. Guess what? Call centers. Longer term, focused on key emerging industries where Colorado had a unique competitive advantage. Call centers were easy. They could take up lots of space real fast. We could do them in lots of 100, 200, 300 at a crack. They gave us a sense of momentum. We knew it wasn't going to be a long-term strategy. Now our strategy on call centers is focused on only one thing, and that's inbound. Those are the $75,000, $80,000 a year jobs that our high-income market can support, and the $15,000 to $25,000 outbound call centers don't have any place in our world. But we did solve both those problems, and people began to think this was really going to work. We had some clusters which we discovered: telecom, memory storage devices, medical instruments, and aerospace. It's interesting about memory storage devices. They were a part of our clusters until 3 years ago, when all of memory storage devices, which we built, and built more of them than even Silicon Valley, all vaporized to China. Commoditized manufacturing. The point is, we saw it coming. The sad point is, when we said we're not going after memory storage as a cluster anymore, there were no companies left to even complain that we were leaving memory storage clusters. They'd lost their memory. These are our clusters in 2011: aerospace, aviation, software, bioscience, pharma, and devices, clean tech, fossils, and on and on. Our marketing strategy in 1986 was print advertising. I'm here to tell you I spent $26 million in my life on print advertising for economic development. Anybody guess how many deals I got off of one ad? One company. Don't hire me, okay? I will misspend your money. $26 million for one deal. We didn't do public relations. We did direct solicitation of corporate executives and key cluster companies. We don't do cold call. We didn't even then do cold calling. Just take a list of the Fortune 500 and call them. Guess what? Somebody's had that idea before you, okay? And we hosted site selection conferences. We had to bring people into the marketplace to look at Denver and realize that there weren't tumbleweeds blowing past the oil derricks on the 16th Street Mall. Once they got in and saw the opportunity and saw where we were going, their perceptions of Denver began to change, and they started to tell lots of other people. So here's our strategy today in 2011. Used earned media to drive our clients to our 65 gigabyte website with a full geographic information system. That's a whole different way of doing the world, and the internet changed everything. We only use print to reinforce a perception that's been made through our earned media. We do our upstream marketing through site selections. We do electronic newsletters to very, very narrowed markets within clusters. And back to Mike's comment, we work very closely with the tourism folks. If you're Hutchinson, Kansas, chances are you haven't had a lot of corporate executives there as a tourist, okay? But if you're Denver, if you're Las Vegas, if you're Dallas, you've got people coming in all the time. And a study that we did back in the early 90s, we found that 82% of our small high-tech executives had first started in Colorado as tourists. So here are we. We started out with 35 partners. As Mike was talking about, we now have 70. Now we finally compete on the same level as we can with Dallas, except, did you hear that $300 million Texas Enterprise Fund? I have Texas envy, I got to tell you. That is an extraordinary amount of money. We reduce our duplication and services, and we present a common face for the entire region. And the biggest thing is we reduce cognitive dissonance for the buyer. In other words, if I go to this town, will this mayor and this other town come around and raise hell for me? And the answer is that doesn't happen anymore. And what that ultimately does is collaboration and cooperation improves your ability to close. This is our region. It's a 9-county region that stretches from just north of Colorado Springs on the Front Range all the way to the Wyoming border. Inside it are 3.4 million residents, 67% of the state's population, and 75% of the gross state product. We govern by 2 documents. One is called the Principles of Agreement. When you come out of finger pointing, you want to normalize and rationalize the system to its partners, to your partners. So what we simply agreed was, let's decide who does what. Man, does that take care of a lot of fighting. If everybody agrees this is my job. Our job is what we call the central office, was to do the national and international marketing, to have money into big opportunities like airports and convention centers and what have you, and to focus on strategic planning and workforce. The countywide organizations folks do their own regional marketing. They coordinate prospects with local governments within their areas of influence and work on also with us on regional workforce stuff. And then at the local level, the small chambers focus on small business development, business retention, and kind of the business climate stuff that goes on every day. But the big question we asked ourselves, how do we keep one another from slitting one another's throat? And there's a lot of that. People talk a lot about cooperation and economic development. You'll find a remarkable absence of it. And what we did by defining through the financial model that was created, in other words, we're doing the national international marketing, is that we had some leverage. And our partners in return had leverage against us because we didn't control any turf. We didn't have any ground that we controlled. That was controlled all by our partners. So we created the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation Code of Ethics, and it runs as follows. You have to, if you're going to be a member, you have to sell the region first and our community second. That gives us an opportunity to not pit community against community until the regional decision is made by the company. Yes, we're going into regional Metro Denver versus regional Metro Phoenix. Then you can sell at the community level to the company. You can't steal one another's prospects. That's zero-sum economic development. You can't run around a deal. In other words, you get kicked out of the deal and you try to run around the deal. All that does is make the company really angry and puts them in some place other than your community. You can't sell against each other. When I came to Colorado in the 1980s, we were literally writing ads in papers in the next county saying, we know the business climate in your county sucks. Move to ours. Now, that's not really smart, but it happens all the time. And if you are doing a retention deal or you have a client and you can't satisfy their needs in your community, you have to turn them over to the other 69 folks to sell them. And it's turned out to be very effective. And finally, what we found is that if you ask and expect higher degrees of behavior, more ethical behavior on people, they love it, knowing that the other people and being assured that the other people are accountable. Does it pay off? We call this our closure rate, and if you want to read the fine print, you'll also find you buy a car under there. But you see in 1985, before this started, we closed about 30% of the deals that came physically came through our door. And by 1993, we went to 62, and you saw on Rob's slide how our incomes went up dramatically during that period. Guess what happened? We're not eligible for as many opportunities as we were in the 1990s because our personal income went into the top 10 in the United States. So our motto is, if you're not writing history, we're not doing it. And boy, that's an easy way to determine whether or not you're going to take on a project. If you're going to write the history of the region, do it. Here's where we are after 23 years of cooperation. We're in the top 5 of all states in diversity of the economy. We've created 2 new clusters, clean tech and biopharma. We have a $5 billion airport, 5th busiest in the nation and the #1 choice for business travelers. We have a new convention center that's actually been built 3 different times. We have a $6 billion life science center, which has its own research park adjacent to it. We have brought in 48 headquarters, not anywhere near to what Dallas has done. They have done an extraordinary job. We were always said, if you're such a major league team, why don't you have baseball? Well, we got baseball. We also have 8 professional sports teams. Good God, there isn't a night in Denver you can't go to a sports game. We have the largest performing arts center outside of Lincoln Center, and we've had 15 years with no violations of the Clean Air Act. We're #1 in concentration of aerospace employment, #3 in total employment. When we started, we were #4 in concentration. 203, we ranked 27 in biopharma. Today, we're ranked in the top 10 of all categories for biopharma except 1. And we were 50th in net generation of electrical by wind in 2000. In 2010, we were 7th. And there's the stat you see us there over on the right side. And you can see Texas, and you can see what one committed person can do in Texas to bring wind energy along. I think what I want to leave you with is that this outcome did not occur in a year or even 5 years. It required a long-term vision, very agile changes in tactics when circumstances changed, and an identified group to serve as a steward of that vision. We discovered all this, by the way, by accident. People always said, boy, that was really brilliant. How did you do that? And I said, we made it up as we went along, okay? It really is. Each community, each region, each state figures that out, what works inside their own culture. This implementation, if you go forward, will span 2 or 3 governors' terms, numerous legislators, county commissioners, and mayors. Elected leaders can spur policy and provide focus, and private sector ensures continuity. And turning economies is not something that runs in a 4-year cycle. It runs over a period of time. The term cluster was associated with another term, which is now referred to as a monkey wedding in our office, by the way. But in Metro Denver today, if you walk into a business meeting and say the word cluster, everybody in the room knows what we're talking about and can generally name 4 or 5 of those clusters. Thank you.